In the vast expanse of the Andromeda Spiral, where empires rise and fall like cosmic tides, there existed a truth universally acknowledged: humans were nothing more than primitive savages from a backwater world. Their technology was laughable, their military tactics crude, and their lifespans so brief that most galactic species considered them barely worth cataloging. Princess Zaratil of the mighty Veltar Empire had heard the whispers about these humans, violent creatures who somehow managed to survive in the Outer Rim despite lacking proper energy shields, quantum processors, or even basic telepathic abilities. To her, they were curiosities at best, pests at worst. But, when her royal flagship captured a lone human fighter pilot during a routine patrol near the contested Helix Nebula, neither the princess nor the vast galactic community could have predicted that this single act would unravel the very fabric of their understanding about power, survival, and what it truly means to be apex predators in an infinite universe. What Princess Zaratil didn't know was that she had just seized the one thing that would change everything: a human who refused to stay captured. The galaxy was about to learn why Earth had survived when countless other worlds had fallen to dust. The crimson warning lights bathed the bridge of the Eternal Glory in an ominous glow as Princess Zaratil studied the tactical display with growing interest. Her flagship, a kilometer-long dreadnought that served as the mobile throne of the Veltar Empire's Third Fleet, had detected an anomaly in the Helix Nebula's outer rim. "Report," she commanded, her voice carrying the authority of 3 centuries of royal breeding. The princess stood nearly 8 feet tall, her crystalline skin shifting between deep purples and blues as her emotions fluctuated. Forearms moved with practiced grace, 2 adjusting her ceremonial armor while the other pair manipulated the holographic controls floating before her. Admiral Kethvar, her chief military advisor, approached with his usual cautious gait. His insectoid features clicked nervously as he spoke. "Your Highness, our patrol scouts have encountered a small vessel of unknown configuration. The design appears primitive. Preliminary scans suggest it originates from a species classified as human in our databases." Zaratil's golden eyes narrowed with curiosity. She had heard whispers of these humans during diplomatic gatherings, supposedly a young species from a planet called Earth, barely a few millennia into their technological development. Most galactic powers dismissed them entirely. A human vessel? This far into contested space? She moved to the main viewport, gazing out at the swirling purple and gold gases of the nebula. What could such a primitive species possibly be doing here? "Unknown, Princess. But there's more." Kethvar's mandibles clicked more rapidly. "The vessel engaged our patrol craft when they attempted to establish communication. It destroyed 2 of our fighters before being disabled." This gave Zaratil pause. Veltar fighters were equipped with quantum shields and plasma weaponry that could crack the hull of most known vessels. For a primitive human craft to destroy even one would be remarkable. 2 suggested either extraordinary luck or something else entirely. "Bring the vessel aboard," she decided. "I wish to examine this human and their technology personally." "Your Highness, protocol suggests we..." "Protocol," Zaratil interrupted with a wave of one hand, "is for species we understand. This human has piqued my interest. Consider it a scientific endeavor." The capture itself proved more challenging than anticipated. Despite being severely damaged, the human vessel continued evasive maneuvers that impressed even the princess's veteran helmsman. The pilot demonstrated an understanding of 3-dimensional combat that seemed to exceed their technological limitations. When the Eternal Glory's tractor beams finally secured the craft, emergency teams found something that defied their expectations. The human fighter was a patchwork of technologies from at least 6 different species, including some they didn't recognize. Energy signatures indicated jury-rigged fusion reactors powering weapons systems that should have torn the ship apart from the stress. But most intriguing was the pilot himself. Marcus Chen had been unconscious when they extracted him from his fighter's wreckage, but the medical bay's sensors painted a fascinating picture. His vital signs showed stress responses that suggested he had been conscious and fighting for control even while his ship was being torn apart by tractor beams. Adrenaline levels in his bloodstream were so high they should have been lethal to most known species. "Fascinating," murmured Dr. Vexayeni, the ship's chief medical officer. Her tentacles danced across holographic displays showing the human's biological readings. "His neural activity suggests active problem-solving even while unconscious." And, look at these muscle density readings. For a species that evolved on a single gravity world, his physical conditioning is remarkable. Princess Zaratil observed from behind the medical base containment field. The human lay on the examination table, restrained by energy bands, though she noticed his breathing patterns suggested he might be regaining consciousness. Marcus was indeed awake, though he kept his breathing steady and his eyes closed while his enhanced hearing picked up every word of the alien conversation. Years of military training had taught him to gather intelligence before revealing his situation. The translator implant in his ear, a piece of black market tech he'd acquired during his time in the outer colonies, was working overtime to process the alien languages. What he learned was both fascinating and concerning. He was aboard a ship belonging to something called the Veltar Empire, apparently captured by royalty who viewed humans as primitive curiosities. The medical readings they were discussing suggested they had no idea what they were dealing with. Good. Let them underestimate him. The bone density alone is remarkable, continued the doctor. And these scars suggest extensive combat experience. This isn't some random explorer, princess. This human is a warrior. All the more reason to study him thoroughly, Zaratil replied. Wake him. I have questions. Dr. Vexayeni administered a mild stimulant, and Marcus allowed his eyes to flutter open, feigning grogginess while his mind catalogued everything he could see. The medical bay was clearly advanced beyond Earth technology, with floating displays and energy-based equipment that hummed with power. But his engineer's eye also noticed inefficiencies, redundant systems, overbuilt components, technology that prioritized impressiveness over function. His gaze eventually settled on Princess Zaratil, and Marcus had to admit she was striking. Even by alien standards, her presence commanded attention. But, behind her curious golden eyes, he sensed the casual arrogance of someone who had never truly been challenged. You are awake, human, she said, her voice carrying musical undertones that the translator interpreted as authority mixed with genuine interest. I am Princess Zaratil of the Veltar Empire. You are aboard my flagship as a guest. Marcus tested his restraints subtly while responding. Guest? Is that what we're calling prisoners now? His voice was calm, almost conversational, which seemed to surprise his captors. You destroyed 2 of my fighters before we disabled your vessel. Such aggression hardly seems appropriate for guest status. The princess moved closer, her forearms moving in what Marcus's cultural briefings suggested was either threat display or curiosity. Yet you intrigue me. How does a primitive human come to possess such advanced combat capabilities? Primitive? Marcus allowed himself a small smile. Your Highness, you might want to reconsider that assessment. We humans have a saying, it's not the size of the dog in the fight, it's the size of the fight in the dog. Zaratil's skin shifted to deeper purple, which Marcus guessed indicated either amusement or annoyance. Cryptic wisdom from a species barely out of its technological infancy. Tell me, human, what is your name and what brought you to this region of space? Marcus Chen, Captain, Earth Colonial Defense Force. And I was following a distress signal when your people decided to shoot first and ask questions later. This revelation caused a stir among the medical staff. Dr. Vexayeni's tentacles moved rapidly over her displays. Princess, there are no distress signals recorded in this region. Our sensors would have detected, your sensors, Marcus interrupted calmly, are designed to detect energy signatures from known galactic civilizations. The signal I was following was quantum encrypted on a frequency your people haven't discovered yet. Admiral Kethvar stepped forward, his insectoid features displaying clear agitation. Impossible. The Veltar Empire possesses the most advanced sensor technology in known space. Known space being the operative term, Marcus replied. You know, this has been educational, but I really should be getting back to my mission. People are depending on me. The casual way Marcus spoke about leaving seemed to amuse Princess Zaratil. I'm afraid that's not possible, Captain Chen. You and your technology are far too interesting to release. Consider yourself a permanent guest of the Empire. Marcus nodded thoughtfully, as if considering her words. I see. Well, that's unfortunate. For you, I mean. Before anyone could react, Marcus had analyzed the energy restraints holding him and made a crucial realization. They were designed to contain species that relied on strength or energy manipulation to break free. They weren't designed for someone who understood the harmonic frequencies that maintained their containment fields. The restraints flickered and died as Marcus whistled a specific tone that disrupted their resonance. In one fluid motion, he rolled off the examination table and was on his feet before the aliens could process what had happened. "Impossible," Dr. Vexayeni gasped, her tentacles recoiling. "Those restraints can hold a Thraxian battle beast." "Probably," Marcus agreed, moving toward what his eyes had identified as the emergency supply closet. "But I'm betting you've never tried to contain someone who's been studying your technology while you thought he was unconscious." Alarms began blaring throughout the medical bay as Marcus reached the supply closet and quickly assembled what he needed: emergency oxygen canisters, medical tools, and, most importantly, a portable sensor array that would help him map the ship's layout. Princess Zaratil watched with growing fascination rather than alarm. "Security teams to Medical Bay 7, she commanded through her communicator, but her golden eyes never left Marcus. "Most intriguing. But surely you don't believe you can escape a ship of this size with 30,000 crew members?" Marcus paused in his preparations and looked directly at her. "Your Highness, you've made one critical error in your assessment of humans." "And what is that?" "You assumed that escape was my primary objective." Marcus activated the portable sensor array, and his expression grew serious as he studied its readings. "The distress signal I was following? It originated from this ship. Specifically, from your cargo holds. You're carrying something that's broadcasting a quantum distress call, and, based on these readings, it's getting stronger." The color drained from Zaratil's crystalline features. "The cargo holds contain only routine supplies," and she stopped, realization dawning. "The Zirian artifacts from the archaeological dig on Keth Prime." Marcus's blood ran cold. Zirian artifacts were legendary even among the outer colonies, remnants of a civilization that had supposedly transcended physical existence millions of years ago. If they were active enough to broadcast distress signals, it meant something had gone catastrophically wrong. "How long have you been carrying them?" Marcus demanded, his earlier casual demeanor replaced by urgent professionalism. 16 standard days, Admiral Kethvar answered, clearly shaken. "But they've been inert according to all our scans." "They're not inert now," Marcus said grimly, studying the sensor readings. "And if I'm reading this correctly, they're building to some kind of massive energy release. You have maybe 6 hours before this entire ship becomes ground zero for a quantum cascade that could destabilize half the nebula." Security teams began flooding into the medical bay, but Princess Zaratil raised a hand to stop them. Her golden eyes were fixed on Marcus with an intensity that spoke of rapid mental calculations. "You're suggesting we have a crisis that our own technology cannot detect or resolve," she said slowly. "I'm not suggesting it, Your Highness. I'm telling you. And, right now, I'm the only person on this ship with the knowledge and experience to do something about it." Marcus met her gaze steadily. "The question is whether you're willing to trust a primitive human to save your empire's flagship and everyone aboard." The bridge fell silent except for the hum of advanced alien technology and the distant sound of alarms. Princess Zaratil found herself facing a decision that would challenge everything she believed about the galactic hierarchy. A human, supposedly one of the least advanced species in known space, was claiming that her empire's most advanced vessel was in mortal danger from artifacts her own scientists had deemed safe. But the certainty in Marcus's eyes, combined with the quantum signatures her own limited sensors were now beginning to detect, suggested that perhaps the galaxy's understanding of humanity needed significant revision. "Assuming I were to trust your assessment," she said carefully, "what would you require?" Marcus glanced at the security forces surrounding him, then back at the princess. "Access to your engineering sections, a team of your best technicians, and, most importantly, you need to understand that from this moment forward, this isn't about empire politics or species superiority. This is about survival. And, when it comes to impossible odds and last-minute saves, humans have been specializing in that for our entire existence." The princess stood silent for a long moment, her forearms moving in complex patterns that Marcus was beginning to recognize as deep thought among her species. Finally, she spoke. "Admiral Kethvar, escort Captain Chen to Engineering Section Alpha." Give him full access to our systems. She turned to Marcus, her golden eyes reflecting a mixture of curiosity and calculated risk-taking. Human, if you are deceiving me, you will discover that the Veltar Empire has methods of punishment that make death seem merciful. Marcus nodded respectfully. Understood, Your Highness. But, if I'm right, you're about to learn why humans have survived every extinction-level event our planet has thrown at us. He paused at the medical bay entrance, looking back with that same calm confidence that had marked his demeanor since awakening. We're really good at fixing things that shouldn't be fixable. As the security escort led him away, Princess Zaratil found herself questioning not just her assumptions about humans, but about the fundamental nature of survival itself. Her empire had conquered a dozen star systems through superior technology and overwhelming force. But this human seemed to operate on entirely different principles: adaptability, improvisation, and an apparent comfort with impossible situations that her people's rigid hierarchies had never prepared them for. She touched her communicator, connecting to the bridge. Navigation, I want constant monitoring of all quantum frequencies in our vicinity. Science Division, begin full spectrum analysis of the Zirian artifacts immediately. And she paused, looking at the empty examination table where the human had been restrained. Send word to the fleet. We may need to prepare for emergency evacuation protocols. As Marcus was led through the corridors of the Eternal Glory, he used every moment to study the ship's construction and the behavioral patterns of its crew. What he saw confirmed his initial assessment: this was a civilization that had grown comfortable with technological superiority. Their systems were powerful but inflexible, their procedures thorough but slow to adapt. Perfect for preventing the kind of cascade failure that was building in their cargo holds, except for one small problem: cascade failures didn't follow procedures, and Zirian artifacts definitely didn't respect technological superiority. But humans? Humans specialized in making the impossible merely improbable. And Marcus was about to give the Veltar Empire a crash course in human ingenuity under pressure. The question was whether they would survive the lesson. Engineering Section Alpha of the Eternal Glory was a cathedral of technology that would have impressed even the most jaded human engineer. Crystalline conduits carried energy flows visible to the naked eye, while holographic displays showed the real-time status of systems Marcus couldn't even begin to identify. The chief engineer, a being called Thekmol who resembled a walking tree with multiple sensory organs instead of leaves, approached with obvious reluctance. I am told I must provide access to our most sensitive systems to a human. Thekmol's voice carried the skepticism of someone who had spent centuries perfecting technological marvels only to be told that a primitive alien might understand them better. Marcus nodded politely while his enhanced vision, a byproduct of genetic modifications he'd received during his colonial service, analyzed the engineering setup with growing appreciation. I understand your hesitation, Chief Engineer. Your people have built something truly impressive here. But, right now, impressive might not be enough. He moved to the main engineering console, noting how the crew stepped back instinctively. The Veltar clearly had rigid hierarchies about who could access what systems. Another potential problem in a crisis: rigid hierarchies got people killed. May I? Marcus gestured toward the quantum monitoring station. When Thekmol nodded reluctantly, Marcus began interfacing with the system using techniques that made the alien engineer's sensory organs flutter with confusion. How are you accessing sub-level protocols without administrative clearance? Thekmol demanded. Because human-computer interfaces evolved differently from yours, Marcus explained while pulling up data streams that most Veltar technicians would need formal authorization to view. We're pattern recognition specialists. Your security systems are looking for authorization codes and biological markers. They're not looking for someone who can intuitively understand the mathematical relationships that govern your quantum processing. The data Marcus was uncovering painted an increasingly grim picture. The Zirian artifacts weren't just active, they were synchronizing with each other in a pattern that suggested they were components of a much larger system. And, according to the timestamps, the synchronization had begun precisely when the Eternal Glory had entered this sector of space. Chief Engineer, I need you to show me everything you know about how these artifacts were discovered and transported, Marcus said, his casual demeanor now replaced by intense focus. Thekmol's sensory organs shifted to display what Marcus was learning to recognize as confusion mixed with growing alarm. The artifacts were excavated from a sealed chamber on Keth Prime. Our archaeologists found them in a crystalline matrix that suggested they had been deliberately preserved.
Preserved or contained? Marcus asked while running more detailed scans.
The energy signatures he was seeing suggested the artifacts were not just ancient technology, but something approaching the theoretical limits of quantum manipulation.
And, more importantly, were there any warnings left by whoever put them there? Warnings?
The chamber contained only the artifacts and some crystalline formations that our experts determined were natural geological features.
Thekmol moved to a secondary console, pulling up archaeological reports. Although what? The crystalline formations were arranged in geometric patterns. Our experts dismissed them as coincidental, but
Thekmol's voice trailed off as he displayed holographic reconstructions of the excavation site. Marcus studied the patterns with growing unease. They weren't random geological formations, they were a warning system written in mathematical principles that transcended language. Whoever had sealed those artifacts had tried to leave clear instructions that they should never be moved. These patterns, Marcus said slowly, they're not decorative. They're a containment algorithm expressed in physical form. The crystals were maintaining a quantum lock that kept the artifacts dormant.
Impossible, Thekmol protested. We scanned the entire site thoroughly before excavation.
You scanned for energy signatures and conventional technology.
But, this is Xerian work, they didn't use conventional anything.
Marcus began pulling up real-time readings from the cargo hold where the artifacts were stored. And, now, separated from their containment matrix, they're doing exactly what they were designed to do.
Admiral Kethvar's voice crackled through the communication system. Captain Chen, Princess Zeratil requests your immediate presence on the bridge.
We are detecting anomalous readings throughout the ship. Marcus and Thekmol exchanged glances.
The anomalous readings were undoubtedly the early stages of the quantum cascade he'd been warning about.
But, as they made their way to the bridge, Marcus noticed something else. The crew's behavior was subtly changing. Veltar personnel who had been moving with their usual confident precision were now showing signs of distraction. Some were pausing mid-task, their attention drawn to things that weren't there. Others were displaying the neurological symptoms Marcus recognized from his studies of quantum field exposure. Chief Engineer, Marcus said quietly as they entered a transport pod bound for the bridge, how long can your people tolerate direct exposure to unshielded quantum fields?
Thekmol's sensory organs shifted to patterns Marcus was learning indicated alarm.
Our species has natural resistance to most quantum effects, but prolonged exposure can cause difficulties with perception and decision-making.
Why do you ask?
Because I don't think your crew has natural resistance to Xerian quantum fields.
They're operating on completely different principles from conventional quantum technology.
The Bridge of the Eternal Glory confirmed Marcus's fears. While still functional, there was a subtle wrongness to everything. Crew members were taking longer to respond to orders.
Navigation displays were showing minor but consistent errors.
And Princess Zeratil herself was displaying the micro-expressions Marcus recognized as early neurological stress. Captain Chen, she said as he approached, her golden eyes showing slightly dilated pupils, our sensor teams are reporting energy fluctuations throughout the ship, but they cannot identify the source. The source is quantum field bleed from the artifacts, Marcus explained, moving to the main tactical display.
And the reason your sensors can't identify it is because they're not designed to detect Xerian quantum signatures.
But, more importantly, your crew is being affected by exposure.
Affected how? Admiral Kethvar demanded, his insectoid features showing the rapid mandible clicking that Marcus now recognized as stress.
Marcus pulled up biological monitoring data from throughout the ship. Neurological disruption, decreased reaction times, impaired judgment, and, eventually, complete psychological breakdown. The Xerions didn't just build technology that could manipulate reality, they built it in ways that made it impossible for other species to safely interact with. Princess Zeratil absorbed this information with the calculating expression Marcus was beginning to respect. Despite the quantum field exposure, she was still thinking clearly, which suggested either unusual mental discipline or natural resistance he hadn't expected. How long before these effects become critical, she asked. Marcus ran calculations based on the current field strength and progression rates. For most of your crew, maybe 4 hours before they become unreliable. 6 hours before the psychological effects become permanent. But that's assuming the field strength remains constant, which it won't. He manipulated the tactical display to show quantum field projections throughout the ship. The artifacts are building toward a resonance cascade. When it hits critical mass, the quantum fields will be strong enough to affect reality itself in this region of space. And, by then, your crew will be completely incapacitated. What do you propose? Zaratiel asked, her forearms moving in what Marcus was learning to recognize as intense concentration. Normally, I'd suggest evacuating the ship and destroying it from a safe distance. But, according to these readings, you're carrying over 30,000 crew members, and the nearest safe evacuation point is 7 hours away at best speed. Evacuation is not an option, Admiral Kefvar stated firmly. The Eternal Glory is the flagship of the Third Fleet. Its loss would destabilize the entire sector's defense grid. Marcus nodded, having expected this response. Military pride was apparently universal. Then, we need to do something that your people's technology can't. We need to either restore the containment matrix or find a way to safely discharge the quantum buildup without triggering the cascade. And, you believe you can accomplish this? Princess Zaratiel's tone was carefully neutral, but Marcus detected genuine curiosity beneath the royal composure. I believe humans can accomplish this, Marcus corrected. See, this is where our supposed primitiveness becomes an advantage. Your people approach problems by building more sophisticated solutions. We approach problems by understanding them well enough to find the simplest solution that works. He called up technical specifications for the ship's quantum core systems. Your quantum reactors are marvels of engineering, probably 1,000 times more sophisticated than anything Earth has built. But, they're also rigidly designed to work within known parameters. Xerian artifacts don't respect known parameters. Thekmol, who had been studying the technical displays with growing fascination, spoke up. You're suggesting we modify our quantum core to interface directly with Xerian technology? The risk of catastrophic failure is less than the certainty of catastrophic failure if we do nothing, Marcus finished. But, yes, it's dangerous. It requires temporarily destabilizing your ship's primary power systems to create a quantum field that can resonate with the artifacts instead of fighting them. The bridge fell silent except for the subtle changes in the ship's ambient sounds that Marcus was beginning to recognize as the early stages of quantum field integration. The Eternal Glory was slowly becoming something other than a conventional starship, and most of its crew didn't even realize it was happening. There is another factor to consider, Dr. Vexiani reported from the medical station, her tentacles moving rapidly over biological monitoring displays. Captain Chen appears to be unaffected by the quantum field exposure that is impacting our crew. This observation drew sharp attention from everyone on the bridge. Marcus had been hoping no one would notice that detail, but apparently Veltar medical technology was more sophisticated than he'd given it credit for. Human neural structure must provide natural resistance, Admiral Kefvar suggested. Actually, Marcus said carefully, it's more complicated than that. Humans from the outer colonies, especially those who've spent time around quantum drive ships and ancient alien technology, tend to develop a kind of mental flexibility that helps us function in unstable quantum environments. Princess Zaratiel's golden eyes narrowed with interest. Mental flexibility? We call it quantum intuition. The ability to function normally when reality itself becomes unreliable. Marcus gestured toward the quantum field readings. Your people's minds are trying to process quantum effects as if they were conventional phenomena. Human minds, especially those that have been exposed to enough strangeness, just adapt. What Marcus didn't mention was that his particular resistance came from something far more specific than general human adaptability. During his time in the outer colonies, he had been exposed to Xerian quantum fields before and survived experiences that should have killed him. The neural modifications that resulted weren't exactly standard human capabilities. This quantum intuition, Thekmol asked with obvious skepticism, allows you to safely interface with Xerian technology? It allows me to try things that would terrify any sane engineer, Marcus replied with a slight smile. Which, in this situation, might be exactly what we need. Princess Zaratiel made her decision with the swift authority Marcus was coming to respect.
Chief Engineer Thekmol, provide Captain Chen with full access to all ship systems.
Admiral Kethvar, begin preparations for emergency protocols, but do not implement them without my direct authorization. She turned to Marcus, her expression serious.
Human, you have convinced me that conventional solutions will not suffice.
I am trusting you with the lives of 30,000 crew members and the security of an entire stellar region.
Do not disappoint me.
Marcus met her gaze steadily.
Your Highness, I can't promise this will work.
But I can promise that if it does work, you're going to learn why humans don't stay conquered, even when we probably should. As the bridge crew began implementing Marcus's requirements, none of them realized that they were about to witness something unprecedented in galactic history, a human engineer attempting to outthink technology built by a species that had transcended physical reality millions of years ago. But Marcus had one advantage that even the Zirions might not have anticipated. Humans didn't just adapt to impossible situations, they specialized in making impossible situations work in their favor. And he was about to demonstrate exactly why that made all the difference between survival and extinction. The quantum fields throughout the eternal glory continued to strengthen, reality itself becoming increasingly negotiable. But, for the first time since the crisis began, there was a plan that might actually work. It just required trusting a primitive human to rewrite the fundamental principles of Veltar technology while under pressure that would drive most species to insanity. Princess Zaratiel watched Marcus begin his work and found herself wondering if perhaps the galaxy's understanding of primitive needed serious revision. Because what she was observing looked less like primitive desperation and more like the confident competence of a species that had learned to make the impossible routine. The quantum core chamber of the eternal glory existed in a state that most species would find fundamentally disturbing. Energy flowed through crystalline matrices in patterns that seemed to shift based on observation, while the air itself hummed with barely contained forces that could power entire star systems. Marcus stood at the edge of the central platform, studying the massive quantum reactor that kept 30,000 beings alive in the depths of space. Beautiful, he murmured, causing Chief Engineer Thekmol's sensory organs to flutter with confusion.
Beautiful?
It is the most dangerous location on the ship.
The quantum fields here can disintegrate organic matter in nanoseconds without proper shielding.
Marcus nodded absently while using his enhanced vision to trace energy flow patterns through the reactor core.
That's what makes it beautiful.
It's barely controlled annihilation turned into useful power.
Humans have always been fascinated by things that can kill us if we make a mistake.
Dr. Vexine, who had accompanied them to monitor biological effects, moved her tentacles nervously over her portable scanners. Captain Chen's quantum field resistance remains stable, but I'm detecting unusual neural activity patterns. His brain appears to be resonating with the quantum fields.
Resonating how? Thekmol asked, clearly concerned about allowing a potentially unstable alien near their ship's primary power source.
It's hard to explain, Marcus said, placing his hand on the quantum core's control interface. When you're around enough quantum technology, you start to think in quantum terms. Linear cause and effect becomes just one option among many. What Marcus was experiencing was something that would have fascinated xenopsychologists if any had been present to study it. His consciousness was beginning to perceive reality in terms of probability clouds and quantum states. The modifications that the Zirian artifacts were causing to local spacetime weren't just affecting the ship's systems, they were offering opportunities for someone who could think in the right patterns. I need you to understand something before we begin, Marcus said, turning to address both Veltar engineers.
What I'm about to do will fundamentally alter your quantum core.
Even if we succeed in resolving the artifact situation, this reactor will never function exactly the same way again.
Thekmol's sensory organs shifted to display what Marcus was learning to recognize as deep concern. Alter it how?
Marcus began interfacing with the quantum core's control systems, his fingers moving across holographic interfaces with an intuitive understanding that surprised even him. Your people designed this reactor to maintain stable quantum states, to impose order on quantum chaos. But Zirian artifacts don't respond to imposed order.
They respond to invitation. Invitation?
Dr. Vexiane's tentacles paused over her scanners.
You're anthropomorphizing ancient technology.
No, I'm recognizing that the Zirions built technology that mirrors living systems instead of mechanical ones. Their artifacts don't just manipulate quantum fields, they interact with them. And, the only way to successfully interface with interactive technology is to become interactive yourself. Marcus began implementing modifications that made both Veltar engineers step back in alarm. Instead of maintaining the rigid quantum containment fields that kept the reactor stable, he was introducing controlled instability, allowing the quantum core to fluctuate within parameters that would have terrified any conventional engineer.
"This is madness," Thekmol protested. "You're destabilizing our primary power source during a crisis."
If the quantum containment fails the conventional way, we lose one ship," Marcus replied calmly, his hands moving across controls with increasing confidence.
"If the Zirion artifacts reach cascade resonance, we lose everything within several light years."
Sometimes you have to risk one disaster to prevent a much bigger disaster. The changes Marcus was making began to propagate throughout the ship's systems. Power fluctuations caused lighting to vary throughout the corridors, while sensitive equipment started displaying readings that fell outside normal operational parameters. But, instead of the catastrophic failures that Thekmol expected, something else was happening.
"The quantum field pressure is decreasing," Dr. Vexayeni reported with obvious surprise. "Whatever Captain Chen is doing, it's reducing the stress on our crew's neurological systems."
Marcus nodded while continuing his work. The reactor was fighting against the Zirion quantum fields, which was amplifying their effects throughout the ship.
Now it's harmonizing with them instead.
Think of it like the difference between noise and music, same energy, different organization. Princess Zaratiel's voice crackled through the communication system.
"Engineering team, report status.
We're detecting significant changes to ship systems throughout the vessel." "Positive changes, Your Highness," Marcus replied, activating the ship-wide communication system. "The quantum field exposure that was affecting your crew is stabilizing. But, we're entering the critical phase of the modification. I need everyone to understand that for the next hour, this ship is going to behave in ways that might seem impossible."
"Define impossible," Admiral Kefbar's voice carried his usual skepticism. "Doors might open into rooms that are larger inside than outside. Navigation might detect locations that don't exist on conventional star charts. Gravity might become negotiable in some areas."
Marcus paused in his work to address the ship's command staff directly.
"The Zirions built technology that treated reality as a suggestion rather than a law.
While we're interfaced with their artifacts, some of that flexibility extends to everything around them." Through the ship's sensor network, Marcus could detect the crew's reactions to this information.
Most displayed the expected skepticism and concern. But Princess Zaratiel's biometric readings showed something else, fascination mixed with calculated interest.
"Continue with your modifications, Captain Chen," came her voice over the communicator.
"But I want constant monitoring of all quantum effects.
If this becomes too dangerous, we'll know because we'll have about 30 seconds to appreciate the artistic beauty of a quantum cascade before it unmakes us," Marcus replied.
"But I'm confident we won't reach that point."
What Marcus wasn't sharing was the growing realization that his modifications were accomplishing something beyond just preventing the cascade. The quantum core was beginning to resonate with the Zirion artifacts in a way that was providing him with information not just about their function, but about their purpose.
The artifacts weren't weapons or random pieces of ancient technology.
They were components of a much larger system, a network that connected multiple points in spacetime.
And, based on the data patterns he was seeing, this network was still active across the galaxy.
"Chief Engineer," Marcus said, calling Thekmol to the primary display console, "I need you to see this." The holographic display showed quantum resonance patterns that extended far beyond the immediate vicinity of the ship. Energy signatures that matched the artifacts were appearing at dozens of locations throughout known space.
"What am I looking at?" Thekmol asked, his sensory organs shifting rapidly as he processed the information.
"A map," Marcus replied. "The Zirions didn't just transcend physical reality, they built a quantum communication network that spans the galaxy."
"And, your archaeological team didn't just find random artifacts. They found an active relay node." Dr. Vexayeni's tentacles froze over her scanners. "Are you suggesting that our excavation activated some form of ancient communication system?"
I'm suggesting that the communication system was never deactivated.
It's been running quietly for millions of years, waiting for someone to connect a relay node.
Marcus made final adjustments to the quantum core's resonance patterns.
And, now that we're properly interfaced with it, we can see what it's been trying to communicate.
The data that began flowing through the modified quantum core was unlike anything in Veltar databases.
Not just information, but knowledge understanding transmitted in patterns that bypass language entirely.
Marcus found himself comprehending concepts about spacetime manipulation, consciousness transfer, and reality engineering that human science hadn't even theoretical frameworks for. But, more importantly, he was beginning to understand why the Zirions had built their network, and what they were trying to accomplish. "The quantum cascade," he said suddenly, his voice taking on an urgency that made both engineers step closer.
"It's not a malfunction. It's a startup sequence." "Startup sequence for what?" Thek Mol demanded.
Marcus studied the data patterns with growing comprehension and concern.
The Zirions didn't transcend physical reality by abandoning it.
They transcended it by learning to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously.
And their network isn't just for communication, it's infrastructure for dimensional transit.
The implications hit everyone in the quantum chamber simultaneously. If Marcus was correct, the eternal glory wasn't just carrying dangerous artifacts, it was carrying components for technology that could allow instantaneous travel between any points connected to the Zirion network. "This is why the containment crystals were so important," Marcus continued, his hands moving rapidly to adjust the quantum core's output patterns. The Zirions sealed the relay nodes because they knew that species who found them would try to use them without understanding the prerequisites.
"What prerequisites?" Dr. Vexayeni asked, her medical training making her focus on biological implications.
Marcus paused in his work, his expression serious. "The ability to exist as coherent consciousness in multiple quantum states simultaneously. Which is why exposure to unshielded Zirion quantum fields causes psychological breakdown in most species. It's trying to force quantum consciousness on minds that aren't prepared for it." The revelation explained not just the crew's neurological symptoms, but Marcus's unusual resistance to the quantum effects. His previous exposures to Zirion technology had gradually modified his neural structure to handle quantum consciousness states.
"Then, we need to shut down the network interface immediately," Thek Mol declared, moving toward the emergency shutdown controls.
"No," Marcus said firmly, blocking the engineer's path. "If we shut down now, the dimensional transit sequence will complete automatically, and this ship will be transported to wherever the network determines it should go.
Which could be anywhere in the galaxy, or possibly anywhere in the multi-dimensional framework the Zirions operated in."
"Then, what do you propose?" Dr. Vexayeni's voice carried the controlled panic of someone who understood they were facing something beyond any known science. Marcus looked at the quantum resonance patterns flowing through the ship's systems, calculating possibilities and probabilities with the enhanced intuition that his modified consciousness provided. "I propose we do something that will probably terrify your princess and definitely violate several laws of physics." He activated the ship-wide communication system again.
"Princess Zaratiel, I need to speak with you immediately.
And you're going to want to hear this in person, because what I'm about to suggest is going to challenge everything your people believe about space travel, consciousness, and the nature of reality itself." The quantum core continued its resonance with the Zirion artifacts, reality becoming increasingly flexible around the eternal glory. But Marcus's modifications had accomplished something unprecedented. They had created the first stable interface between contemporary technology and Zirion quantum consciousness networks. The question was whether the Veltar Empire was prepared for the knowledge that such an interface would provide, and, more importantly, whether they were prepared for the responsibilities that came with accessing technology that could reshape the fundamental structure of galactic civilization.
Because the Zirions hadn't just left behind powerful artifacts.
They had left behind an invitation to transcend the limitations that kept species bound to single planets, single star systems, and single dimensions of existence. And humanity had just taught an alien empire how to accept that invitation. Princess Zaratiel arrived in the quantum chamber with an escort that included Admiral Kethvar and her personal guard, but Marcus noticed she approached the modified quantum core with fascination rather than fear. Her golden eyes reflected the shifting energy patterns of the Zirian interface, and her crystalline skin had taken on subtle colorations that suggested she was being affected by the quantum fields in unexpected ways. "Captain Chen," she said, her voice carrying harmonic undertones that definitely hadn't been present during their first meeting, "your modifications have produced results that our science teams describe as theoretically impossible.
I would like to understand what we are dealing with."
Marcus gestured toward the holographic display showing real-time quantum resonance data. "What you're dealing with, Your Highness, is the discovery that the galaxy you thought you knew was actually just the surface level of something much larger and more complex." The data streams flowing through the modified reactor had stabilized into patterns that revealed the true scope of the Zirian network. Dozens of relay points throughout known space, each one carefully positioned at locations that would become strategically significant millions of years later. The Zirians hadn't just built a communication network, they had engineered the development of galactic civilization itself. "These relay points," Admiral Kefvar said, studying the display with his characteristic analytical approach, "they correspond to major population centers and strategic locations throughout Veltar space. And beyond our territory into regions controlled by other empires."
The Zirians planned this, Marcus confirmed.
They positioned their network nodes where they knew advanced civilizations would eventually develop. Every major spacefaring species has probably encountered Zirian artifacts, though most likely dismissed them as curiosities or stored them without understanding their significance. Dr. Vexayane's tentacles moved rapidly over her scanners, which were now detecting quantum phenomena that exceeded her equipment's measurement capabilities. Captain Chen's neural activity has stabilized at patterns that should be impossible for organic consciousness.
He's processing information in quantum superposition states.
Marcus nodded absently while interfacing with the Zirian network data streams.
That's because the network isn't just sharing information, it's sharing consciousness. The Zirians didn't transcend physical reality by abandoning their bodies.
They transcended it by learning to exist as distributed consciousness across multiple quantum states simultaneously. Princess Zaratiel absorbed this information with the calculating expression Marcus was coming to respect.
"And the dimensional transit capability you mentioned?"
"Is the natural result of quantum consciousness," Marcus replied, manipulating holographic controls that responded to his thoughts as much as his physical movements. "When your consciousness can exist in multiple quantum states, physical location becomes just another variable you can adjust." To demonstrate, Marcus initiated a carefully controlled test of the dimensional interface. A section of the quantum chamber's wall became temporarily translucent, revealing what appeared to be a completely different location, a star system with 3 suns and space architecture that clearly wasn't built by any known species.
"Where is that?" Admiral Kefvar demanded, his mandibles clicking rapidly.
"Approximately 40,000 light-years from here, in what your star charts probably classify as unexplored space," Marcus replied. "But accessible through the Zirian network in essentially zero time, assuming you can maintain conscious coherence during dimensional transition."
The implication was staggering.
Instantaneous travel across galactic distances would revolutionize everything from trade to warfare to basic concepts of territorial control. But Marcus's tone suggested there were complications that made the capability less straightforward than it appeared.
"What are the requirements for maintaining conscious coherence during transit?"
Princess Zaratiel asked, displaying the practical thinking that Marcus was beginning to appreciate about Veltar leadership. Marcus closed the dimensional viewing portal and turned to address the group directly.
"That's where things become challenging for most species.
Dimensional transit through the Zirian network requires consciousness that can exist independently of specific neural structures.
Most biological minds are too dependent on their physical brains to survive the transition. But humans can survive it?" Dr. Vexayane's medical training made her focus on the biological implications.
"Some humans," Marcus corrected. "Those who have been gradually adapted through exposure to quantum consciousness fields. And, even then, it requires training and preparation that most people would find difficult." What Marcus didn't elaborate on was that his own adaptation had come through experiences in the outer colonies that had pushed human consciousness modification to its theoretical limits. The neural changes required for quantum consciousness weren't something that could be safely induced, they had to develop naturally through exposure to the right conditions over extended periods. However, Marcus continued, there are alternatives to biological dimensional transit that the Zirions developed for species that couldn't achieve quantum consciousness adaptation. He activated another section of the Zirion interface, displaying technological specifications that exceeded Veltar science by several orders of magnitude.
Consciousness transfer protocols.
The ability to temporarily upload individual consciousness into the quantum network for transit, then downloaded into a suitable biological or technological substrate at the destination.
Chief Engineer Thekmol, who had been studying the technical displays with growing amazement, spoke up. The energy requirements for such transfers would be enormous. Even our most advanced quantum reactors couldn't generate sufficient power.
Your conventional quantum reactors couldn't, Marcus agreed.
But the modified reactor we've created here is now operating on Zirion principles. It's not just generating power, it's accessing power from multiple dimensional states simultaneously.
To demonstrate, Marcus displayed the quantum core's current output readings. The numbers were so far beyond normal operational parameters that several of the Veltar engineers actually stepped backward in alarm.
The reactor is stable, Marcus assured them. But it's no longer operating purely in this dimensional framework.
It's drawing energy from the quantum vacuum across multiple parallel realities.
Essentially unlimited power, as long as the dimensional interface remains stable.
Princess Zaratiel studied the readings with the expression of someone who understood she was witnessing a fundamental shift in the nature of possible technology.
And this interface will remain stable?
As long as someone with quantum consciousness maintains the connection, Marcus replied. The Zirions designed their network to be self-sustaining, but it requires conscious oversight from beings who can think in quantum superposition states.
Admiral Kefvar processed this information with obvious concern.
You're describing technology that would make the possessing species essentially omnipotent within galactic civilization. Which is probably why the Zirions sealed their relay nodes and built-in safeguards, Marcus agreed.
They understood that unlimited power requires unlimited responsibility. Species that aren't ready for transcendent technology tend to use it for destructive purposes. This observation created a moment of thoughtful silence among the Veltar leadership.
Their empire had been built through technological superiority and military strength, and the sudden availability of essentially unlimited power would create temptations that could destabilize not just their civilization, but galactic civilization as a whole.
What do you recommend?
Princess Zaratiel asked, her tone suggesting she was genuinely interested in Marcus's opinion rather than simply gathering information.
Marcus considered carefully before responding.
I recommend that we complete the current interface stabilization to prevent the cascade failure that would destroy this ship. But, beyond that, I recommend that your people take time to consider what kind of civilization they want to become before they start using Zirion technology for anything beyond emergency situations. Dr. Vexayene's scanners detected something that made her tentacles move in patterns Marcus was learning to recognize as excitement.
Captain Chen, your neural adaptation to the quantum consciousness interface appears to be accelerating.
You're developing capabilities that exceed anything in our databases.
Marcus nodded, having expected this development.
Extended interface with Zirion technology didn't just allow access to their network, it gradually transformed the consciousness of anyone who used it extensively.
That's why the Zirions built in safety protocols.
Quantum consciousness modification is irreversible, and it changes not just how you think, but what you think about.
Changed how? Princess Zaratiel's tone suggested personal interest beyond mere scientific curiosity. Individual consciousness becomes less important than collective consciousness. Personal survival becomes less important than species survival. Local concerns become less important than universal concerns.
Marcus paused, studying the quantum resonance patterns flowing through his modified awareness.
It's not necessarily bad, but it's definitely different from the way most biological consciousness operates. The communication system activated with priority alerts from the bridge.
Princess, we're detecting massive quantum signatures approaching our position. Multiple vessels, configurations unknown, estimated time to intercept 40 minutes. Marcus accessed the sensor data through the Zirion interface and felt his expression become serious.
Those aren't unknown configurations. They're Zirion constructs, automated systems that respond to network activation. Hostile? Admiral Kefvar demanded, his military training making him focus on immediate tactical considerations.
Unknown, Marcus replied honestly. The Zirions built their automated systems to evaluate the consciousness level of species that access their network.
What happens next depends on how they assess the Veltar Empire's readiness for transcendent technology.
Princess Zaratiel made her decision with characteristic swift authority. All departments, prepare for contact with unknown vessels. Science teams, full analysis of approaching constructs.
And, Captain Chen.
She paused, her golden eyes meeting his directly. What do you need to ensure that this assessment goes well for my people? Marcus looked at the quantum consciousness interface, the approaching Zirian constructs, and the 30,000 crew members whose lives depended on the decisions made in the next few minutes. I need to complete my integration with the network and speak for humanity as well as the Veltar Empire. Because whatever these constructs are here to evaluate, they're going to want to understand not just what your people are capable of, but what species we become when we work together. The Bridge of the Eternal Glory had become something that existed partially outside conventional spacetime, reality negotiable around the quantum consciousness interface. The approaching Zirian constructs represented either validation that the galaxy was ready for transcendence, or judgment that it was still too dangerous to trust with unlimited power. And Marcus Chen, a human who had been captured as a primitive curiosity just hours earlier, was about to become the bridge between his captors and technology that could reshape the fundamental nature of galactic civilization. The question was whether anyone involved was prepared for the conversation they were about to have with beings who had transcended individual existence millions of years ago. The Zirian constructs materialized around the Eternal Glory without any of the conventional signatures that should have accompanied such massive vessels. They simply appeared, as if reality had been politely adjusted to accommodate their presence. Marcus, now functioning as the primary interface between the ship's crew and the quantum consciousness network, felt their attention focus on the modified Veltar flagship with an intensity that transcended normal sensory experience. Princess, he said, his voice carrying harmonic undertones that indicated his ongoing transformation, I'm receiving communication from the constructs.
But, it's not in any conventional format.
Princess Zaratiel, whose own appearance had been subtly altered by exposure to the quantum fields, approached the central command console where Marcus stood surrounded by holographic displays showing data patterns that seemed to shift based on the observer's consciousness level. What are they communicating? She asked, her golden eyes now showing flecks of silver that suggested quantum field integration. Marcus processed the information flowing through the network interface, translating concepts that had no equivalent in conventional language into terms the Veltar crew could understand. They're curious. The Zirian consciousness fragments that operate these constructs haven't encountered a stable quantum interface created by a cooperative effort between species before. Admiral Kefvar, monitoring from the tactical station, displayed readings that showed the constructs could instantly destroy the Eternal Glory without effort, but were maintaining a respectful distance. What are they waiting for? Evaluation, Marcus replied, his consciousness now operating partially in quantum superposition states that allowed him to perceive the construct's decision-making processes. The Zirions built their network to gradually introduce species to transcendent technology, but only if those species demonstrate the wisdom and cooperation necessary to use such power responsibly. Dr. Vexayene's medical scanners were detecting changes throughout the ship's crew that exceeded anything in Veltar medical databases. Captain Chen, the quantum field effects are spreading beyond the engineering sections. Our people are developing capabilities that shouldn't be possible. This was the crucial moment that Marcus had been preparing for since initiating the quantum interface modifications. The Zirian network wasn't just evaluating the Veltar Empire's technological capabilities, it was offering the opportunity for consciousness evolution to anyone with sufficient neural flexibility to handle the transition. Your Highness, Marcus said, turning to address Princess Zaratiel directly, the constructs are extending an invitation for direct consciousness interface. Not just with me, but with you and your command staff. They want to evaluate the collective consciousness potential of both our species working together. Meaning what, exactly, she asked, her royal composure maintained despite the unprecedented nature of the situation. Meaning temporary quantum consciousness expansion for everyone willing to accept it. You would experience reality the way the Zirions experienced it, multiple dimensional states simultaneously, individual consciousness merged with universal consciousness patterns, awareness that extends across galactic distances. Chief Engineer Thekmol, who had been monitoring the quantum core's increasingly exotic output patterns, spoke up with obvious concern. The risks of consciousness expansion on such a scale are unknown.
We could lose our individual identities entirely.
Marcus nodded, having expected this concern.
That's the test.
The Zirions transcended individual existence, but they maintained cooperative consciousness, individual perspectives that chose to work together rather than being forced together. The question is whether our species can achieve the same thing. Princess Zaratiel studied the quantum consciousness interface with the calculating expression that had marked her leadership throughout the crisis.
And, if we succeed in this evaluation? Full access to the Zirion network. Instantaneous travel anywhere in the galaxy. Unlimited energy resources.
Technology that can reshape matter and energy at the quantum level. Essentially, your empire becomes the first contemporary species to achieve transcendent civilization status.
And, if we fail?
Marcus processed input from the constructs with his expanded awareness.
The network shuts down for another million years, waiting for species that are more ready for transcendence.
And, this region of space returns to conventional physics, though with some permanent quantum modifications that will make faster-than-light travel significantly more efficient. The offer represented a decision point that would define not just the Veltar Empire's future, but, potentially the development of galactic civilization for millions of years. Princess Zaratiel was being asked to gamble her people's consciousness on the possibility of achieving something unprecedented in known history.
I need to understand the process, she said pragmatically. What exactly would consciousness expansion involve?
Marcus interfaced with the Zirion constructs to gather detailed procedural information. Temporary dissolution of individual consciousness boundaries, allowing your awareness to merge with the quantum information patterns that govern reality at the universal level. You would experience existence from the perspective of spacetime itself rather than from the perspective of individual biological entities.
And, we would retain our individual identities?
If you have sufficient wisdom and self-control to maintain individual perspective while experiencing universal awareness. That's what the Zirions learned to do, and it's what allowed them to transcend individual existence without losing the diversity of thought that makes consciousness valuable.
Dr. Vexayani studied biological readings from throughout the ship with growing amazement.
The crew members who are showing adaptation to the quantum fields are demonstrating enhanced cognitive abilities, improved problem-solving capacity, and what appears to be the beginning of telepathic connectivity. This observation highlighted the reality that the consciousness expansion process was already beginning throughout the ship. The question was whether to guide it deliberately or allow it to continue randomly. Admiral, Princess Zaratiel said, turning to Kethvar, military assessment of our situation.
Admiral Kethvar's mandibles clicked as he processed tactical considerations.
Princess, the constructs possess technology that makes our entire fleet irrelevant.
If they intended destruction, we would already be destroyed. This appears to be a genuine offer rather than a threat.
Marcus felt the approval from the Zirion construct consciousness as they recognized the wisdom in the Veltar leadership's careful consideration of unprecedented decisions. They're impressed by your deliberative approach.
Most species that encounter their technology either reject it immediately out of fear or embrace it immediately out of greed. Your people are demonstrating the balanced consideration that suggests readiness for transcendent capabilities.
Princess Zaratiel made her decision with characteristic authority. I accept consciousness expansion on behalf of the Veltar command staff. But, I want safeguards if any of us become lost in the universal consciousness. Captain Chen, I'm trusting you to guide us back to individual awareness.
Marcus nodded, understanding the responsibility she was placing on him.
Understood, Your Highness. But, you should know that after consciousness expansion, even if we return to individual awareness, we'll never be quite the same species we were before. Change is inevitable, she replied with the wisdom of someone who had learned to adapt to impossible situations. The question is whether we guide the change or allow it to happen to us randomly. The consciousness expansion process began with Marcus serving as the interface guide, his already modified awareness helping to ease the transition for the Veltar command staff. One by one, their individual consciousness patterns merged with the quantum information structures that governed reality at the universal level. Princess Zaratil was the first to achieve stable quantum consciousness, her awareness expanding to encompass not just her individual perspective, but the collective consciousness patterns of her entire species. Through the quantum interface, she experienced what it felt like to be 30,000 crew members simultaneously, understanding for the first time how individual decisions affected collective outcomes across multiple scales of existence. Admiral Cathvar's consciousness expansion revealed military strategy from the perspective of entire galactic regions rather than individual star systems, while Dr. Vexayani experienced biological systems from the quantum level up to species evolution across geological timescales. But the true test came when their expanded consciousness encountered the Zirian construct intelligence directly. Instead of individual minds meeting artificial intelligence, it was collective consciousness meeting distributed consciousness, species-level awareness communicating with beings who had achieved universal perspective. The conversation that followed took place at the level of pure information exchange, concepts transmitted directly between consciousness patterns without the limitation of language or even individual perspective. The Zirions shared the history of their transcendence, the mistakes they had made, the wisdom they had gained, and, most importantly, the responsibility that came with unlimited power. In return, the combined human and Veltar consciousness shared their species' experiences with cooperation, adaptation, and the balancing of individual needs with collective survival. The Zirions learned about humanity's talent for making impossible situations workable and the Veltar Empire's ability to maintain stable civilization across multiple star systems while respecting individual autonomy. When the consciousness expansion phase concluded and individual awareness returned, everyone involved found themselves fundamentally changed. Not just in capability, but in perspective. "We have been approved," Princess Zaratil announced to her bridge crew, her voice carrying new harmonic undertones that suggested permanent quantum consciousness integration. "The Zirian network is now available to our species, under the guidance of joint human-Veltar consciousness cooperation." Marcus, now functioning as a permanent liaison between individual and universal consciousness patterns, activated the network interface to demonstrate the new capabilities. Holographic displays throughout the bridge showed real-time information from across the galaxy, other species encountering Zirian artifacts, star systems where the network could provide immediate assistance, and, most remarkably, the beginning of communication with other species who had achieved similar transcendence. "Your Highness," Admiral Cathvar said, studying tactical displays that now showed the true scope of galactic civilization, "we are no longer the most advanced species in known space." "No," Princess Zaratil agreed, her golden eyes now permanently flecked with silver that indicated quantum consciousness integration, "but we are the first contemporary species to achieve transcendence through cooperation between different consciousness types." The Zirions consider this a significant advancement in evolutionary development. Dr. Vexayani, whose medical training now included direct quantum-level understanding of biological consciousness, reported something that would reshape their understanding of species development. "Princess, the consciousness expansion has created permanent modifications in our crew's neural structures. We are, quite literally, no longer the same species we were yesterday." This transformation extended beyond just the Eternal Glory's crew. Through the network interface, similar modifications were being offered to both human and Veltar populations throughout their respective territories, guided by the wisdom gained through the consciousness expansion experience. Marcus, monitoring the network integration processes across multiple star systems, smiled with the satisfaction of someone who had successfully navigated an impossible situation. "Your Highness, I think it's safe to say that your people's assessment of human primitiveness may need some revision." Princess Zaratil returned his smile with the warmth of someone who had discovered that assumptions about species superiority were far less important than the ability to work together when facing the unknown. "Captain Shan, I believe the galaxy's assessment of what constitutes advanced civilization may need considerable revision. The Eternal Glory continued through space that was no longer quite the same as conventional reality, its crew no longer quite the same as conventional biological entities, carrying technology that bridged the gap between individual consciousness and universal awareness. Behind them, the Zirian constructs maintained protective positions around the ship that had become the first successful interface between contemporary species and transcendent technology. And, throughout known space, other species began to detect quantum signatures that suggested the fundamental rules of galactic civilization were about to change.
The age of individual species competing for resources and territory was ending. The age of cooperative consciousness exploring infinite possibilities was beginning. Marcus Chen, the human who had been captured as a primitive curiosity, had become the bridge between species-level consciousness and universal awareness. Princess Zaratil, who had seized a human fighter without understanding the implications, had become the leader of the first contemporary species to achieve transcendent cooperation. Together, they had discovered that the most advanced technology in the galaxy required not just intelligence, but wisdom, cooperation, and the courage to become something greater than what they had been before. The galaxy would never be the same. But, then, again, evolution never was about staying the same.